All right, Dennis, welcome to the pod, Proof of Thought. So glad to have you here with us. I know there's so much going on in the Bitcoin space right now, so much going on with these strategic reserves. And so, who better to have here today with us than you? So, thanks for doing this.
There's never been a better time to be alive as a Bitcoiner. Incredible moments in history taking place back to back to back. We all in the early days. I was barely part of the early days, but in the early days, it was sort of like that. No one would have, I think, imagined that we would be at this point where the United States is an absolute leader on this technology. So excited to talk about it and looking forward to the conversation, Charles.
Awesome. Let's kick it off. Can you start off by telling us a bit about your background? Where are you from? What's your educational and professional background? And how and when did you actually get into the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, there's a few probably important moments in my life, but none more important in my Bitcoin career than when I discovered Bitcoin in 2017. And that was a very interesting time in my life. I was very focused politically on houseless engagement, trying to help people in the homeless community. I was trying to advocate for the reduction of money in politics. I was trying to advocate for having a more financial inclusive system. So to me, when I found Bitcoin, it was a very natural connection. It was very naturally aligned with the technology. Ultimately, I discovered it because my friend said, "Hey, I want you to look at this perfectly anonymous internet money, and it's totally private, and you can send it anywhere. No one can trace it." And I was like, "No way, man! Nothing on the internet is totally anonymous, totally private." So, I, of course, jump right into researching Bitcoin to try to prove my friend wrong. And lo and behold, we all know Bitcoin is not perfectly anonymous internet money. There are certainly privacy enhancements, but um, the big thing that I found in there was that it was truly aligned with a lot of these values that I had held. Even though my friend was wrong about that component of Bitcoin, Bitcoin truly is one of the most financially inclusive technologies on planet Earth, if not the most financially inclusive. And for two major reasons. One is anybody can participate economically. So doesn't matter your age, sex, sexual orientation, gender, political beliefs, religious beliefs, where you were born, the color of your skin. Like none of this stuff matters to Bitcoin. Like you do not have to sign up at the door to be able to participate. And that's really helpful for groups that have been marginalized, discriminated against, left out. That's really helpful for people that are in authoritarian parts of the world, in parts of the world where they do not have financial systems at all. But it's not just the economic component of Bitcoin that truly provides a ton of value to people that have been excluded. It is also the fact that they can participate in the governance of Bitcoin, which is probably the most radical part of the technology. In fact, you'll be hard pressed to find another technology that is as inclusive from a governance perspective for any type of digital money in the world. Think about the way that all it takes is 100, maybe $150 to run a node right now, and you can participate in the governance of Bitcoin. You're not even allowed to participate in the governance of monies all across the world. The government wholly owns and controls how those operate. Now, certainly, if you have a fair and free elections and a democratic system, like you can hope that to some extent you still have power over the money system that rules your entire life. But generally speaking, there's nothing that comes as close as Bitcoin is to truly being financially inclusive to anyone and to anyone in the world. And so that those two things were really big for me when I discovered Bitcoin. And certainly I've gone on to really love a lot of other components of the technology. But all of that really led to ultimately standing up one day and being like, you know what, I need to launch a nonprofit, get into the political space, and fight to make sure that the United States is a leader on this technology because I truly believe it has incredible values to bring back to America and bring back to people all across the world.
Yeah, Dennis, and you're contributing in quite a big way in terms of the governance piece. You're the co-founder, as you were mentioning, and CEO of Satoshi Action Fund, which launched in 2022 and is a 501c4 nonprofit educational organization dedicated to informing policymakers and regulators about Bitcoin's mining benefits and how it can be used as a tool to support other public policy goals. What motivated you to start this organization?
I mean, it was really that place of wanting to make sure that people could participate in the technology. It was around 2021, 2022. A lot of people thought, "Oh, well, you know, we need to keep Bitcoin separate from politics. We need to keep Bitcoin separate from government because these things are, they're supposed to be separated from each other. There's a whole separation of money and state thing component." And I agree with the ethos of that. In spirit, I'm there, right? Um, Unfortunately, we live in a world where, regardless of whether you care about government or you care about politics or you are interested in talking to lawmakers, like they are interested in you. Like Bitcoin is going to become so big and has become so big that lawmakers will be forced to pay attention to it. And when they do, the next thing is worrying about what they are going to decide to do with the technology. You know, you could live in a country where the government could ban Bitcoin. They could ban Bitcoin mining. We've seen this. This has happened. This is not something that is irrational. Governments have banned Bitcoin mining in whole. In fact, at one point, China banned Bitcoin mining, and 60% of the hash rate of the entire Bitcoin mining network is there. And less than a year later, there was like 5 or 10%. Now, since it's grown back a little bit because they have maybe soft unbanned Bitcoin mining, we aren't really entirely sure. But at the end of the day, like your governments can really impact the way that you're allowed to interface with this technology. And we need to recognize that. And we have to make a decision. Do we sit on our hands and do we do nothing? Do we just let these things take place? Do we let it all burn to the ground? Some Bitcoiners probably actually do agree with that. I actually see them online all the time, like let it burn to the ground. Literally, there are Bitcoiners like that. I disagree with those Bitcoiners. I think we need to engage politically and make sure that lawmakers think about Bitcoin the way that the people like you and me and others who have been attracted to the technology think about it. I want lawmakers to view and see the benefits that me and you see. I want them to realize that Bitcoin is a truly financially inclusive tool. I want them to see Bitcoin mining is good for balancing the grid and for incentivizing the growth of clean energy. And if we just sit on our hands and don't do anything, we will not be able to have those conversations with lawmakers. We won't be able to convince them that Bitcoin has many benefits to offer. And there will certainly be other people on the other side who hate Bitcoin or have some reason to not like the technology, probably because of misinformation that they believe on their own, but that will go and they will talk to the lawmakers and they'll convince the lawmakers that they should ban it, they should restrict it, they should tax it, they should repress it, because they are maybe only see the bad, you know, the dark side of the technology, the potential technology. And every technology potentially has a dark side, right? Like nuclear energy, think of that. Like nuclear energy can be used to blow up entire cities. I should say nuclear itself can be used to blow up entire cities, or nuclear energy can be used to power entire cities. So there are certainly things that are around Bitcoin that we should be aware of. Like, yeah, can people use it permissionlessly and send it anywhere in the world and potentially send it to fund drug cartels or send it to pay for weapons? That's possible. Theoretically, yes. I mean, you'd be a moron to do that because it's so traceable and so trackable that many sex rings, traffic criminals, terrorist organizations, and others that have tried to use the technology that way have actually gotten rooted out because of the fact that it is like leaving breadcrumbs. It is like leaving a forensic trail when you use Bitcoin for criminal activity. So a lot of criminals have stayed away from it. But if you just hear from someone randomly, like, oh, wow, some criminal used Bitcoin or some terrorist organization used Bitcoin. Yeah, well, like some terrorist organization has used the internet, but we don't ban the internet. What we do is we try to come up with smart policies and smart regulations to make sure we incentivize the positive side of those types of technologies and also make people aware of the other side of what could potentially be used for, while also having that deeper level of education so that they can understand that even if someone uses it this bad way, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to continue using it that way. Just because someone is mining Bitcoin off of a coal plant today doesn't mean that they're going to be doing it in the future. In fact, we have seen a massive shift in the Bitcoin mining space where more and more and more of the space is using cleaner and cleaner energy sources. And I'm aware of that not just from the data, but because I'm personally involved with trying to help renewable energy providers utilize Bitcoin mining to be able to help mitigate the waste that is produced from those energy sources. So I'll pause there. You've got me up on my soapbox. I launched Bitcoin. I launched Satoshi Action to make sure Bitcoin in the United States was protected, to make sure that we are a leader on the technology. And the way we do that is we got to educate these lawmakers and regulators on how valuable it is. Otherwise, we could end up in a country where all of a sudden owning Bitcoin itself is a crime.
Yeah, so you've been in the weeds for a couple years now, tackling a lot of these issues, educating policymakers on what's going on here. Which of your accomplishments at Satoshi Action Fund are you most proud of today?
I would have to say there's really two periods of being really proud of the work that we got done. The first one certainly being the first bill that we passed into law based off of our model legislation. That was a huge victory for us. That was something that, we had finally proven that it was something that we could get across the finish line. There's making campaign promises. There is making promises about what you can do. And then there's actually going out there and doing it. And a lot of times in the political space, people make very big promises and it can be very hard to deliver. I mean, we know just how hard it is to deliver on campaign promises that Satoshi Action has put out there. We operate oftentimes like a lot like a political campaign, where a politician goes out and promises they're going to get things done. A lot of times they don't get those things done. But we at Satoshi Action, at the very core of our organization, it is critical that we achieve provable victories for the Bitcoin space. We call it proof of work. We don't want to have, oh, yeah, sure, we talked to this one guy and he introduced a bill and, we had a great conversation. No, we were the first organization in the history of the world to have our model draft language used to pass the first strategic Bitcoin reserve bill into law in the state of New Hampshire. And that is an irrefutable fact that you can look up, and there's an entire trail that can prove that, instead of, oh, well, I had a photo with the guy and, maybe I did it, maybe I didn't, but you can't prove it. Super important that we have provable wins, but those types of wins are very difficult to achieve. And so we were able to do that for the first time ever in 2023. So that was a massive win for us. We did it again in 2023 to prove that we aren't just a one-hit wonder. And then I'd say from there, shifting forward, there's some good wins definitely in the pipeline that we've had. But then getting to that point where we passed the first SBR into law in New Hampshire was certainly the second most important moment in the history of our organization, because we were, for the first time ever, really going out there and saying, like, we are going to get this done. Like, I had it posted to the top of my Satoshi Action Twitter handle, the one that we use for the organization. It just like pinned to the top since November. So obviously delivering on that is huge, because oftentimes when you tell people what you're going to do in politics, not only can they track to make sure you're doing it, and if you don't, you can get in trouble, but you'll also find that some people will try to resist that, because they're like, well, if we can stop Satoshi Action from getting this done, then that's good for us because they can't look better than us, or it's good for us because we don't believe in Bitcoin. And we actually did have that happen. So one of the big things that happened during that strategic Bitcoin reserve launch and getting 25 states to introduce this stuff, there were some states that got super close to the finish line. Some of them were making good progress, and it was creating so much noise that people actually that didn't like Bitcoin in the traditional financial system were calling key players in the space, begging with them, pleading with them, please don't pass this. This is really bad. This is such a bad idea. Like, you don't want to take power away from the banks. Like, of course the banks are spending ridiculous amounts of money in the space to make sure that they have control now. For a while they were resisting it. Now they just want to have the control. But that was a huge win for us. Massive win, getting the New Hampshire win. We were very excited about it. And we, of course, are going to continue pushing forward, continue providing wins for the space from a policy perspective, from a research perspective, from helping advocates to advocate to their lawmakers. We're not going to stop. We're just getting started. We're very excited about the position that we're in at the state level, where oftentimes we say the states lead the policy conversations, and they have, because you have got 50 chances to pass something. Whereas in Washington, D.C., you might only have one chance every 5 to 10 years. Maybe we'll get something done in this current Congress, but you never know. We still haven't had meaningful legislation get across the finish line. In the meantime, the states are continuing to pass things like Bitcoin rights and strategic Bitcoin reserve policy into law left and right.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dive deeper into both the state level reserves and the federal level reserve as well. But given the shift in DC from being anti crypto in the past to now being pro crypto, and government officials now wanting to work with crypto to put proper regulations into place, what's your key focus today, and why do you think that's the most important work you can be doing to really move Bitcoin forward?
Well, there's one thing about policy that I think is tough. You have shiny objects and you have things that are meaningfully important, but don't receive quite as much of the attention because they might not be as shiny or as exciting. So certainly strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation is an important piece of policy at the federal level, but it is more so the shiny piece of policy at the federal level. Everybody wants it and everybody's interested in it in the space. They all like this idea. But there is a lot of policy that is important and I think will also majorly move the ball forward for Bitcoin that isn't as exciting, but certainly is just as important, if not more important in some ways. I think one of those is certainly market structure. Market structure is a key piece of policy that is going to be very difficult to get done, extremely difficult. There is a lot of consternation about whether it will get passed after the stablecoin legislation gets done with. In the stablecoin legislation, there has been really tough battles over getting that across the finish line. I think they will. I think it still has a good chance of passing. But I mean, think about it this way: like 6 months ago, everyone was like, stablecoin legislation is a foregone conclusion, like it's going to pass, like no worries. Now we're like, oh, it's looking tough. So we got to get through that. We got to get through stablecoin legislation, and then in order to get to market structure legislation, we need to see that previous piece of policy get through the pipeline. But there is actually so much concern around the market structure legislation getting done that some are considering packaging stablecoin and market structure together. And like, this is not like a public. I don't know how much there are people publicly saying this, but this is being said from office to office, back and forth, between everybody that you can think of in DC right now. It is the like known secret that there is a real considerable effort to potentially combine these two bills together. The thought process is it provides the political willpower to be able to get both of them across the finish line instead of just like stablecoin legislation, because if they just get stablecoin legislation done, they might pause and be like, well, that's good enough. We got it done. But market structure is really the one that not only is important, I think, for the space, but there are huge interests in seeing it get accomplished. The other thing around market structure legislation, though, that we have to really be careful is that we got to do it the right way. We can't just have legislation that we cram through the system and we go, well, good enough. At least we got something done. I understand the impetus for wanting to do something like that, but I do believe that it's critically important that we're cautious around how it is crafted, because it'll have long-term ramifications for how we innovate into the future, for how this space grows, for making sure that we don't run into another SBF FTX situation. The structure of that legislation is going to be critical, the way it develops the rules. But once it's done, and even I think if it's done in a good way or a bad way, in the short term, it will have massive the price of Bitcoin, adoption of Bitcoin, digital assets writ large. It'll have a very positive impact on the sector. I often compare it to when we passed the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which ultimately re-regulated the entire telecommunications sector, allowing for broadband, the other types of technologies that were coming into the space. And I wouldn't say they got it perfect. I don't think any bill is perfect. But after that bill passed into law, you saw the adoption of broadband, Wi-Fi, you name it, cell phones explode exponentially. And there's like all these charts where it's like Telecommunications Act passes in 1996 and like charts all start to bend upwards. So the reason I bring that bill up is because I think that we're in a very similar place right now with Bitcoin and digital assets. I think that there's a lot of actors in this space who want to spend a lot of money and invest a lot of time and a lot of energy to build things. And they are concerned that if they drop $10 billion or $100 billion into this space, that someone else will come along and write regulations that ban parts of this industry or significantly hamper large portions of this industry. There's a reason why a lot of lawmakers have this term that they say, which is like, we need to have durable rules of the road so people know how to operate. It's like building a highway. You're building this freeway for people to go super fast on, and you've got these guardrails on the side. Now, certainly the problem with that type of policy is when you create it is if you make the guardrails too tight, you've cut off lanes of traffic that you didn't necessarily need to cut off. But at least you made that like one area of like super fast. Everybody can go super fast the right direction. So we got to get it right. We got to do it the right way. We can't be overly aggressive. We also can't be too soft and allow a lot of the shadows that a lot of the scammers and fraudsters have been able to operate within continue to exist, because we can create policies that are great for innovation in this country. We're one of the best countries in the world for creating these types of policies. It's why we're such a dominant force in the tech sector. But if we create them the right way, we can protect innovation. We can have that super highway for all folks to be able to go down and make America the best place in the world for Bitcoin and digital assets, and while simultaneously preventing things like SBF and FTX from happening again in the future. That's the goal. That's the target. But the target is small when you're doing policy. And if you do it the wrong way, you could have the absolute opposite effect because you weren't consciously thinking about the impacts of policy changes. I often akin policy changes in the political space to policy changes on Bitcoin. A lot of Bitcoiners will understand this and will appreciate this. Small changes to Bitcoin's code today can have long-term ramifications that we cannot predict because it is a technology that has never existed. And so the same thing is true when it comes to government policy about Bitcoin. The types of policies that we put in place that are going to last for 10, 20 years, just like how they last in Bitcoin a long time. Like, it's so funny to me how similar government policy crafting at the federal level is to Bitcoin. Like it takes a lot of work to get to consensus and to get everybody to agree, like, this is what we're going to do. It's actually even harder with Bitcoin. But the reason why it's important that it's hard is because we need to make sure that it's difficult to make changes. We want to make sure that everybody agrees on that ultimate outcome. In Congress, the same thing is true as the same thing is true with Bitcoin. We need to make sure we get to consensus, and we need to make sure that we have a bipartisan coalition behind this next wave of policy. And if we don't, if we create policies like market structure, which do not have bipartisan consensus, we could end up in a very bad place. The reason why I say that is because hyper-partisan policies that get passed, bills that are passed by one side and that have potential long-term massive implications for our country, oftentimes get attacked and are subject to potential repeals in the future. And that is really bad. You don't want to create a bunch of regulations for crypto and Bitcoin and go, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then 4 years later, another administration comes in, a new Congress comes in and goes, actually, we think that's shit and we're going to get rid of it. It's bad for a number of reasons because investors, like I said before, there's people that are looking at this space. There are groups that want to build that could be building in a huge way and will build in a huge way if we create long-term durable regulations that are smart policies that we've designed because we're a thoughtful country and we think about the future. We think about how long-term implications of policy, and they want to invest a lot of money in there. And if we part of that, like, sort of long-term durable component is the bipartisan nature, because if it's one-sided, there is a very strong chance that someone could come in and blow it all away, and investors will recognize that and go, wow, this thing is not really bipartisan. Like, this is really has a high chance of being completely demolished when another party comes in to take over because it just wasn't done the right way. So it's critical that we get that bipartisan component. We need that long-term durable policy solutions that are actually smart, that push innovation to the future, and also get rid of all of the scammers and the fraudsters in the space. And I don't think there's anybody in Bitcoin who could disagree that it's important that we do all of these things. Now, if you're just super anti-government anarchist type, like, yeah, you're going to disagree with me. But like, if you have any inclination to being an American who wants to see us lead on this stuff, and you care about government policy to any extent, like, it's hard to disagree that, yeah, we should write smart policies that limit the amount of frauds and scams and help innovation to flourish. And that's why market structure is so important. We need to make sure and get it across the finish line. And thirdly, because if you want to do strategic Bitcoin reserve, both of those other two policies have to get done before that's ever even considered.
Yeah. So could you give us an example of one of these market structure policies that you think is critical to the success of Bitcoin going forward?
Yeah, it's really important that with market structure legislation, mostly that we just get it right on how we decide what is a security and a commodity. I think that's probably the most important component of the conversation that's taking place right now. If you end up in a situation where we've developed a route for securities and commodities to be circumnavigated the regulations that currently exist, and it becomes too aggressive, you're certainly going to have a loss of bipartisan consensus. I'm almost certain of that. And that's why it's not good for Bitcoin. But I think ultimately, like, and this is the part where the anti government Bitcoiners will agree with me. Bitcoin will be fine, right? Like, that's the whole saying in the space. Like, Bitcoin don't care, block by block, onward we go. I'm talking about it more in the lens of, like, if you're here in the United States and you want to see us be a leader and you want to see Bitcoin flourish in the US and adoption flourish in the US, this is the path we have to go down. And it requires that bipartisan consensus to get there for long-term durable regulations to exist. And in order for us to do that, we got to get the policy right. And I think we have to be very careful about the way we ask questions about how something is classified as a commodity or security, and also how we regulate other parts of the space as well, which are clearly not securities or commodities. So it's a great question. Certainly, we got to make sure this is done the right way. I think Bitcoin, again, itself is fine either way, but I want to make sure that the USA is able to be this dominant leader in adoption and in investment into the space. And that happens when we create long-term, durable, bipartisan regulations around the broader crypto universe, because it'll give investors the confidence to know that they can invest. It'll give builders the confidence to know that they can build in this space, and then they're not going to be washed away by future regulatory shifts.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to the state level reserve stuff that we were talking about earlier. So anyone can basically go to bitcoinlaws.io to get all the latest and greatest data on Bitcoin strategic reserve bills. I believe 20 states are currently have a live strategic reserve bill, which, if enacted, would allow those states to hold Bitcoin through one means or another. Can you talk about what options are actually available or on the table for these states. It doesn't seem like there's a uniform approach, but that different states will go about this differently. For example, New Hampshire, as you mentioned earlier, was the first state to pass a SBR bill into law. And in their case, the state treasurer will be able to purchase Bitcoin and other digital assets that have a market cap over 500 billion, which currently only applies to Bitcoin. Meanwhile, the SBR in Arizona focuses more on redirecting unclaimed property profits toward Bitcoin and other digital assets. So, a couple questions about this. I'll start with, are there a few set ways for states to choose from in terms of how they structure their SBRs, or are they pretty much free to use their own creative discretion here?
I mean, so it's really, it comes down to the policy crafting process. At Satoshi Action, we developed two model policies, one which is a Bitcoin only version, and we also created what was called the market cap threshold version. That has been the dominant version that lawmakers have defaulted to using all across the country. The reason why they like the market cap version, the one that restricts which digital assets can be put into the strategic Bitcoin reserve based on market cap, is because it eliminates an entire conversation about Bitcoin versus you name some other coin. Every lawmaker in this country at some point asks that question, just like every human in the world asks the question of, if you want me to have Bitcoin, well, why not do these other coins? Like, why Bitcoin versus crypto? Like, I don't understand this conversation. Anyone who has come to the final conclusion that it should only be Bitcoin in a strategic Bitcoin reserve has done a significant and massive amount of research, maybe hundreds or possibly thousands of hours of research to get to that point. Now, there are certainly some folks in the space who sort of just buy into that theory, who probably haven't spent as much time. But the reason why is because they follow one of those people who's done a lot of that time and energy and really, really gotten to a point where they can give a very super convincing argument of why only Bitcoin should be the asset that should be in a strategic Bitcoin reserve. 99.999% of lawmakers have not gotten to the point where they understand why Bitcoin should only be in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And there are other people who think that there should be more stuff in the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So most lawmakers have defaulted to keeping it open with extremely tight and stringent requirements around how the strategic Bitcoin reserve enables other assets to come into it, because they know they don't want to have that conversation with the lawmaker. When you are a Bitcoiner, or maybe you're a crypto person who just understands that only Bitcoin should be in a strategic Bitcoin reserve, you're thinking about introducing a law. You're a lawmaker. You're saying, I want to get this done. I want to win. I want to be the one to make this happen. It's urgent. States more than ever need tools like Bitcoin in their toolbox to be able to combat things like the runaway monetary inflation and total wastefulness that's occurring in Washington D.C. and the monetary debasement that is impacting the purchasing power of the dollars on their budgets. They know it's an important thing that needs to happen relatively soon. Do you wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years of attempting to pass this bill, each time trying to educate lawmakers on why it should be Bitcoin only? Or do you just find a roundabout way to say, you know what, actually, why don't we just say there needs to be a $750 billion market cap and it has to be that high for 12 months before any digital asset can qualify? That's the standard that we recommended. Now, some lawmakers have gone with 500 billion because they just believe that that's the political reality that they need to get there. But this is the whole reason why those bills are designed that way. And certainly there's going to be lawmakers who do Bitcoin only versions. And in the future, Bitcoin lawmakers and legislatures will pass Bitcoin only versions of this type of policy. But if you want it, the political reality is, if you want to pass it this year, and probably if you want to pass it next year too, it has to have this type of language in there. In fact, 99% of the bills that were introduced, almost 99% of them, especially the ones that made significant progress, have this type of language in there, and they opted to use this type of language. In fact, in the state of Texas, they started with the Bitcoin only version, and then they ended up using the language from the market cap threshold version that we created. So clearly there is like a lot of political momentum around this specific model, but the model will also grow and change and improve over time. All our models always grow and improve and change over time at Satoshi Action. We've done it with virtually every single model we've ever had, even ones that we've passed into law. We had right to mine, passed that into law in 2 states, and then we turned it into Bitcoin rights, because we didn't want to just protect mining. We wanted to also protect the right to self-custody, the right to run a node, the right to peer-to-peer transactions. We wanted to make sure that the language was much broader. Even that bill is going to change again. Every year, those bills change, they improve, they get better. And I'm certain once there is enough lawmaker education on why we should only have Bitcoin and things like a strategic Bitcoin reserve, you will have the opportunity to take those strikes and move the ball forward. But it's sort of a question It's like, do you want to wait 5 years for that first bill to actually pass, for the first Bitcoin only strategic? Some Bitcoiners might say yes. I think we're in a more urgent situation. And I don't think states should wait 5 years, because if they do, they're going to continue to lose purchasing power. It's probably going to happen at an increased rate. In fact, since 2018 alone, we did a paper on this, states have lost 25% of their purchasing power if they held on to dollars just since 2018. So you want them to wait another 5 years. What are they going to be at, like 35, 40% loss? We are in a situation right now where states are starting to begin onboarding Bitcoin as a tool. Some states will need it more than others. Some states will need it right away, and some states will need it in the future. Some states will pass these laws now. Some states will pass them in the future. But it's a situation where they need to have that tool in their toolbox. And I don't think I need to explain it to what is probably a retail Bitcoin audience too much. But at the end of the day, they need to have that option in order to make sure that they can protect themselves from the continued runaway money printing and wasteful spending in Washington, D.C. The recent bill that just came out, I don't know if you saw it, it's an incredible amount of additional spending that's going to be taking place in Washington, D.C. And states don't have their own money printer. They don't have unlimited budgets. So they need to make sure and protect themselves against the continued loss of purchasing power of the dollar. That is going to happen. So they need to protect themselves from that. It's really important they do so. The mechanisms for how it'll operate are going to be different all over the map. You're going to have different policies in different states because there are different lawmakers in different states, different cultures, different understandings of Bitcoin in different states. But right now, where we are, it sounds like, and it looks like 95% of them are going to use this market cap threshold until, of course, we can prove otherwise. Now, New Hampshire was the first ever to pass that bill into law. That was the market cap threshold. Arizona used a similar approach in the way that they think about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it's funded a totally different way. They tried to pass ones that were, I think there was 4 bills in total. One was like a Bitcoin only version. Like I said, some people are going to try these bills. There was a Bitcoin only version in Arizona, and it got vetoed. It made a lot of progress, but it got vetoed ultimately. Also, on the one from Representative Winiger in Arizona, HB 2749, he did it in such an interesting way. I mean, there's a reason why he got a Democrat governor to sign this bill into law. He made it so that HB 2749, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, was funded by revenue generated from assets in the Unclaimed Property Fund. Basically, every state has an unclaimed property fund, every single one. The way it works is if you lose something, as an example, like if you leave a Bitcoin on an exchange for too long and you don't interact with your account, the service provider, let's say it's Coinbase, you name it, will be forced to actually send that Bitcoin to the state. Every state has this process, and they just hold it for you. They keep it on your behalf. Unfortunately, they will liquidate oftentimes those assets into cash immediately upon them being sent to the state. So what they did is they said, well, why don't we just keep these digital assets in their native form for a while instead of liquidating them, because that's better for the consumer. And then what they said is, well, let's say we have some Ethereum, let's say we have some Solana in here, like one of these other proof of stake coins. Why don't we stake that while it's in the Unclaimed Property Fund? And the revenue generated from that we'll use to buy Bitcoin for the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. Super smart idea. Really love it. I think it was a great idea from Representative Winiger. In fact, we're going to be making that model policy at Satoshi Action because it was such a smart idea to use it in a budget neutral way. And he even got a Democrat governor to sign it, which I think just shows the bipartisan support for this type of idea when it's done the right way. The governor didn't want to use funds from the taxpayers to fund it, but she was perfectly happy doing it with funds from the Unclaimed Property Fund.
Yeah, and so in that example you just gave, would the principal funds or any of the interest gained through staking or anything like that, or the growth on Bitcoin, would that go back to any of the consumers if they did come and try to claim that in the future, or do all of those gains, any of the appreciation and the principal, does that all just belong to the states once it's part of that unclaimed?
No, it belongs to the state. I mean, the state is the one holding on to those assets for them. And so if you're just leaving your assets in an unclaimed fund, we've never seen a state ever go, well, we're going to go make money for you. Like, that's never going to happen. So the state is like, well, since we're having to hold on to your assets for you, and actually has a cost to the state to do that, just like it's a cost for anybody technically to hold on to your assets for you, there's inherent cost to that. They will be staking those assets and taking that yield that's generated to buy Bitcoin for the state. So that's the way it's set up right now. And I've never heard of a state reinvesting someone's funds for them to make them money and then giving it all back to them when they, sort of find it. But it's not a bad idea necessarily.
No, just wanted to clarify there, but makes sense. And so curious, as the leader of the Satoshi Action Fund, and you're sort of alluding to this, but in an ideal world, how would each of the states go about setting up and managing their SBR? Or do you think that naturally they should just have different structures based on differing state criteria that they have.
It's a great question. Certainly, in an ideal world, wouldn't it be awesome if states could custody their own Bitcoin and have a minimum Bitcoin balance that they kind of keep all the time, and maybe they make it a key initial investment, and no matter how big it grows, they just kind of continue to hold on to it. There's all sorts of different ways to imagine these things. For some states, they will need to pay off their debt, and maybe they want to structure it to pay off the debt. Some states, they will want to use some of the funds that they have that they've been really prudent with to continue to grow those funds or protect those funds from the loss of purchasing power. Certainly, there are states out there who they have lots of money they're sitting on, like they're doing great, and those states will want to take that money and put it into something that's going to perform better over the long term, instead of just keeping it in cash, keeping it in bonds, or keeping it in treasuries. Uh, we did on our same paper that we showed that they could use Bitcoin as a tool to combat the loss of purchasing power. We also did it with treasuries and bonds as well, and so there was a 10% loss over since 2018 alone, almost 25% loss if they kept it in cash. But if they would just made a 3% allocation into Bitcoin, they could have combated 100% of that loss of purchasing power. So very small, just 3% allocation, and you combat all of that loss of purchasing power. And so, in an ideal world, it's really just not a cookie cutter situation for each state. Some states will have different priorities. So, but ideally, of course, that they would hold some level of that Bitcoin in custody. But most states are not going to do that. They will probably use a custodian. Anchorage, Coinbase, Fidelity, all these guys, they have very, very strong Gemini. They have all very strong custodial services. Some are better than others, of course. And, it's up to the state to, I think, work with those providers to see who could be a good fit. Some states will be like, nah, I don't want to do this at all. Like, I just want to have an ETF. And some are probably going to do that first because it feels most comfortable. And states are also already used to buying ETFs. Many states buy ETFs and hold them for other products with the same people that have Bitcoin ETFs. So I can imagine that, like, a state that already has a pre-existing relationship with someone who has a Bitcoin ETF and they've bought other types of ETFs from them before might say, well, let's just start off being more conservative, small c conservative. Let's be careful. And let's be sure that, we just go about this in a way that we're used to doing it. But in an ideal world, certainly you would love to see a situation where states understand how to manage their own private keys, or in the middle ground of that would be to work with someone who helps them custody their assets.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about Florida. Around November 2024, a lot of crypto thought leaders who I heard talk about state level SBRs thought Florida would certainly enact a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Turns out the bill has already been turned down, from what I understand, in Florida. Were you surprised by this?
No, no, not surprised. The bills are tough. They're very tough. The reason I wasn't so surprised is because it's a very tough state, and I didn't see the political willpower manifesting in order to get something done the way that a state like Texas was. Like, Texas is a big state, but you had two chairmen, one in the House, one in the Senate, sponsoring the legislation. You had the lieutenant governor coming out to support the legislation. You have a governor who has in the past said very positive things about the space. You have one of the largest Bitcoin mining constituencies in the entire country. You have a huge constituency of Bitcoiners that live there full time. So when I was looking at somewhere like Texas, versus like a Florida, even though they're both relatively, both big states, hard to get policy across the finish line in a big state, I I still was like ranking Texas as a question mark in the beginning, even though it had all that political support. But Florida, I just didn't see that quite come together. So obviously, as Texas moved forward, it was great. I think that the deciding factor was when the lieutenant governor made the bill a priority. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. But I hadn't quite seen that come together for Florida. But it's not to be said that it might not happen with the next governor. Governor DeSantis is on the way out. You have someone like Representative Byron Donalds, who is running to be governor of Florida, who is massively pro Bitcoin, incredibly pro Bitcoin, and has already endorsed the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and has written positively about Bitcoin mining in Bitcoin Magazine, and is running to be the next governor. And he has a good shot. He has a very good shot at it. So, if someone like him were to win, that would be massive. The odds of passing a strategic Bitcoin reserve there in the state would explode dramatically. I think also it's important to keep in mind that elections are tough. So I wouldn't say that he has a guarantee. So certainly, if you like the idea of that happening there and you're in Florida, you should certainly reach out to his campaign. I know they're going to be pushing very hard to promote Bitcoin through the campaign cycle.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thanks for the your thoughts there and the clarifications on that. And speaking of lawmakers, of course, some of them have concerns. Curious, what are the concerns you hear most often, and how do you address those potential issues?
Lawmakers always hear one of two things. They'll hear that Bitcoin is being used for illicit finance or that Bitcoin mining is boiling the oceans. There is a grain of truth in both of those things, which is why it makes them powerful pieces of misinformation or FUD around Bitcoin. Certainly, people do use Bitcoin mining to be able to mine off of very inefficient energy resources. Certainly, there has been Bitcoin miners in the past who have strained the grid, but by far and away, Bitcoin miners at writ large, I would say 95% of the space is working towards cleaner energy resources, or they are working towards helping to balance the grid, or they are finding ways to be able to mitigate methane emissions from landfills and from oil and gas operations. And so, yeah, certainly there are examples that people can point to on Bitcoin mining doing things that are not good for the environment. But this technology is one of the most powerful energy tools on the planet. And, of course, I could get into it pretty far and deep. That's one of the big things that we talked about a lot in the early days of Satoshi Action, but I don't want to get too technical with it. But ultimately, Bitcoin mining is incredibly useful for balancing the grid. We've proven this time and time again. It nearly saved the grid in Texas during Winter Storm Elliott. 1,700 megawatts of power was delivered back to the grid during that storm. That's enough energy to heat 1.7 million small homes. It's enough power to energize 320 large hospitals, and it was happening right in the middle of a winter emergency. It probably saved lives, and it's easy to make that argument because the last winter storm they had, just a little over a year prior, called Winter Storm Uri, was almost identical in strength and size and scope, and it killed 700 people. So there's certainly an argument to be made that Bitcoin mining bare minimum saved the grid billions of dollars in Texas, and maybe even arguably saved some lives in the process. The other argument is that Bitcoin is used for illicit finance, and that it's bad because criminals can use it. So yes, criminals can use Bitcoin. Criminals can use the internet. Criminals can use these headphones. They can use this microphone. Like, because someone can use something doesn't necessarily mean that we should ban it. First of all, just on its face. But the deeper part of it is that Bitcoin is one of the most traceable, trackable currencies on the planet. When you want it to be, so to speak. Like if you identify someone as a criminal and you know what their wallet address is, you can go back and sort of track everything together. There's almost like forensic bread crumbs for folks to discover. And this is why a lot of terrorist organizations in the past that have said, "Oh yeah, send us Bitcoin," have been like, do not send us Bitcoin, because if they've identified who we are, they can see all the things that we've done, and they will know and be able to expose us. And they've actually exposed multiple terrorist organization donors. They've brought down multiple criminal rings and sex trafficking rings because they used Bitcoin. There's a whole book actually about this, how they took down this massive sex trafficking ring because of the fact that they were all using cryptocurrency, and they realized, oh gosh, these guys have didn't know that they were leaving this giant trail of transactions for us to follow, and rooted out the entire criminal enterprise. So you got to pay attention to both sides of the conversation here. You have to be able to say, okay, yes, those things have happened, but here's the bigger picture about Bitcoin. It is one of the absolute best technologies on planet Earth for advancing clean energy and for balancing the grid. And it is one of the absolute worst technologies on planet Earth for people that are participating in nefarious activity, because there is such a way that you can track it. Now, the privacy hawks are probably like, oh my gosh, it's horrible, right? But ultimately, there are massive privacy improvements using Bitcoin over the traditional financial system. I don't think it would be good for Bitcoin to be truly anonymous or perfectly private. Some people will debate me on that, certainly. But it is a huge improvement. But it is not, in a weird way, simultaneously, it's really bad for criminal organizations. It has this weird duality where it's like, it's super good for improving your personal privacy, but if you start to engage in like long-term bad behavior, it's like really bad for that, actually. So I'm not sure why Bitcoin tends to have this sort of like win-win situations for people. I just continue to discover that over and over again with the technology. But those are the two major hurdles that we have with lawmakers. But when we sit down with them and we go through that conversation and we talk about the various points around the technology, there is this huge sort of eye-opening experience that happens with a lot of lawmakers, a lot of staff, where they start to really see that there's huge opportunity and potential. Some people are certainly set in their ways. There's some offices out there that are never going to change. I think they're going to be anti-crypto to the day they leave this planet Earth. That's unfortunate, but some people just get trapped being the anti people on any type of issue. I mean, you still have people who are like, I don't know, anti sliced bread probably to this point. I joke, of course. But we are seeing major progress with lawmakers. Lawmakers across the country are understanding those arguments. They're seeing the potential, and they're starting to be educated in a way where they can truly see the value of passing policies into law that'll ensure our country is a leader on the technology.
Thinking about the state level versus the federal level, why did you decide to primarily focus your work on the states versus the federal government?
Yeah. It's really important thing that people need to understand. You take a step back and look at the political system here in the United States in order to answer this question. We are very different as a country than 99.999% of the world. There's only one country who has a somewhat similar model of governance structure to us, and that's Switzerland. Our governance structure has a huge bifurcation of power between the states and the federal government. The Constitution enables the states to make laws, to pass laws in areas where the federal government doesn't have authority or hasn't yet made any sort of rulings in. And that's really important. That might seem mild, but that's really important because what it does is it allows the states to trial and error different types of policies either before the federal government gets involved or because the federal government has no intention of getting involved, or even in worst case situation, the federal government is actually like negative, passing really bad policies around that area, and they're attacking that area. A really good example of just what exactly this can look like and how it can change is the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry totally wrecked by the federal government and state policy pretty much simultaneously back in the 60s and the 70s. And what happened was when the federal government created the war on drugs, and of course this is true for all drugs, but let's separate cannabis out for the sake of this argument. But when the war on drugs was happening, because federal policy was aligned with state policy, the federal government and the states worked hand in hand to go after anybody that was participating in the cannabis industry. What happens is when you change that dynamic where, let's say, a state passes pro-cannabis, pro-THC legislation into law, you separate the collaboration between the federal government and the state. So that's a really important moment because the federal government typically does not get involved with mass law enforcement activity at the state level, at the local level. They're much more nationally focused or internationally focused. So they don't, like, for instance, have a bunch of local law enforcement. Like you have county, city, state police. There is no like federal, county, state, and city police. And so if you want to have this massive war on drugs to be successful, you need to be able to collaborate with local law enforcement. But the moment you sever that tie, it makes it extremely difficult for the federal government to enforce federal policy at the state level because the state is saying, we are no longer going to enforce your federal policy because we actually think it's perfectly legal and fine for cannabis to exist. That happened across the country. 75% of the country now has pro-cannabis THC books on the laws on the books. The federal government still has problems with it, but this is why you don't see mass law enforcement activity taking place at the local level anymore because the states are like, we're cool, we're good with this stuff. That is one of the main reasons why we are focusing on the states of Satoshi action, because we actually did see the federal government going the wrong direction on crypto and Bitcoin at the federal level. And we wanted to do one of two things. We wanted to make sure that if there were actual laws that banned or outlawed Bitcoin, there would be states that would be like, no, we're actually cool with this stuff. We are not going to enforce federal policy. So it is a backstop against federal overreach. The other reason that we do it is because you can actually influence federal policy by using states to pass bills. They call it the laboratory of democracy or a good place for incubating good ideas. The states are an incredible place to take and test out these ideas and say, hey, you know what, even though the federal government doesn't want to try this yet, they might not have banned it yet, let's show them the power of what this stuff can do. Let's show them what can be possible by passing bills into law at the state level. There are many good ideas and many great movements that have started at the state level and ultimately impacted federal policy because of their efforts. That the cannabis industry is about to be included in that effort. They're not quite there yet. They're trying to bring cannabis down the schedule to separate it from things like really hard drugs, but they're going through that process right now. But other movements, including the civil rights movement, including a woman's right to vote, all started at the state level. And so they started at the state level and they worked their way through the states. And then eventually the federal government was like, oh, like we need to like change these rules. The same thing is even true with oddball things like FDIC insurance. FDIC insurance was a trial and error process of different banks at different states trying different programs of how they could protect their consumers and how they could prevent bank runs. Well, it was so successful that eventually the federal government was like, oh, that's a great idea. We're going to create a nationwide policy for FDIC insurance to protect against all these bank runs that have been taking place over the last several decades. So, for two reasons, we really go to the states. One, backstop. You don't want to have the federal government like banning Bitcoin and then the state also being like, yeah, we also want to ban this too, and we'll actually let you use our law enforcement to go after individuals. I think that was seemed much more plausible in 2020 and 2021. Now it seems sort of totally irrational, of course, to people. But that's the people were asking that question quite a lot. And because there were actual efforts to backdoor ban things like self-custody. The second reason is to influence federal policy. And we believe that we have had an impact. To what degree, I'll leave that up for the historians to decide. But ultimately, after passing, 9 bills into law and eight different states, we are really starting to see a lot of federal action take place. And it wasn't just us. There were 30, 40, 50 bills that were getting introduced and pushed through the state process. And then all of a sudden you even had state lawmakers like Senator Lummis, who was a state lawmaker, go to the federal system. This is another thing too, is like you pass these policies with state lawmakers and then all of a sudden they get like popular and famous and they get injected into the federal system because they're so good at what they do. That's another reason why working at the states can be a really valuable tool, because you can create a bench of pro Bitcoin lawmakers. And when the time comes, potentially they can move on to the federal system. In fact, 50% of all federal lawmakers at one point or another were a state lawmaker. And so you're building the bench of state lawmakers, you're creating a backstop against federal overreach, and simultaneously you're impacting federal policy. Working at the state level is probably the highest leverage point that you can possibly have in the political system in the United States for the most efficient way to do it. It's the most efficient way to do it. It's the least capital intensive. It's actually the lowest risk if you know what you're doing. Because if you go to the federal government, you try to pass a bill, I mean, just look how freaking hard it is to get anything done there, man. It's the most inefficient system on planet Earth. So by doing it at the state level first, we can show that the states are leading and hopefully influence that federal conversation, create that backstop, and also make sure that we're building a bench of lawmakers that support this technology and will be future federal lawmakers.
Yeah. Zooming into the federal level a bit more, under the Trump administration, the United States now has a Bitcoin reserve, which at the current time directs the U.S. government to hold on to the Bitcoin it had previously seized. But the president's executive action didn't give authorization for actual Bitcoin acquisitions. I think the general consensus in the Bitcoin community is that the federal BTC reserve isn't yet all that it could be, and that Bitcoiners want to see the government become an active purchaser of Bitcoin. You were talking about Senator Cynthia Lummis. She has a bill that she's trying to push through to actually achieve that goal. Do you see the government actively purchasing Bitcoin either this year or at all during the next 4 years of the Trump administration?
It's possible. It's a very difficult bill to get across the finish line. As mentioned a couple of times, there is going to be a lot of need for bipartisan consensus to get something like pro crypto legislation across the finish line. We have a lot of that for stablecoins. To what degree we will for market structure is a big question, and we have not seen yet any on strategic Bitcoin reserves that is meaningful or has been durable. I believe Ro Khanna is the lone Democrat lawmaker to say positive things about it, but he's not a bill sponsor and he has yet to speak about it since speaking about it that first time. So it's critical if you want to get this type of work done to have it be bipartisan. It's a very cutting edge idea. So if we expect that to happen, we're going to need to move through the process of passing these other bills first and then hopefully work towards building that bipartisan consensus.
Yeah, and so given all of your work at the state level, what advice would you give lawmakers in DC working on the federal BTC reserve, or even to Ro Khanna to sort of rally more of his colleagues to back this effort?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're going to need more support from different factions to get on board with this type of policy. In my opinion, that could change without really needing to do any major, adjustments to the policy or needing to pass other types of policies. Like I have been wrong. Like I'm not going to try to assume that I know exactly how to do everything just because I've passed, 9 bills in 8 different states doesn't necessarily give me I think, authority to speak on how to do everything in Washington D.C. It's a very different place. It's a very difficult place. You have to get the stars to align. It's very hard to get things across the finish line in Washington D.C. Certainly, there is the political willpower to move policy forward today for stablecoin and market structure. It's just not there yet with strategic Bitcoin reserve policy. So typically, when you don't have the political willpower on something like that, you have to find ways to generate political willpower. So we'll see what can be done in order to get that political willpower to adjust and to get the political interests and stars to align. It's going to take some work, but I feel confident in the folks there that in the space that are doing it, that they're working very hard and working overtime to try to get it across the finish line.
Wonderful. And before we wrap up here, Dennis, want us to zoom out right now, 10 years from now. A lot of people today feel that they're too late to Bitcoin. It's crossed 100K already, and they don't want to buy at a local top. But if we were to zoom out, what would you say to those today? Why they should, even today, should be paying attention to Bitcoin now, despite it being at or near all-time highs?
Yeah, I mean, well, Bitcoin's always going up, right? So it's just like buying real estate. People don't stop buying real estate because it gets more expensive. Certainly people wish they were in sooner with real estate, but real estate is still one of the most powerful tools for generating wealth, and Bitcoin is even more powerful than real estate. And you get to buy it in fractions instead of having to go spend $1 million or $2 million to buy a whole house and to rent it out and generate revenue with it. You can spend $100 or $1,000 or 10,000, or you can buy $1 million in Bitcoin or $10 billion in Bitcoin. So it's custom fit to the savings potential of the person that is looking at the technology. It is also much cheaper and much more affordable than real estate to buy and hold, and is also much more liquid. So if something bad happens, you need the money, you can get it very quickly. You can get it 24/7, 365, pretty much anywhere on the planet that has an exchange. And simultaneously, there are no costs to store it or to hold it or to own it. You can put it in self custody. You buy a little hardware wallet. I probably got one laying around here somewhere. You buy a little hardware wallet and you can store your, 150 bucks of Bitcoin in it or your $1 billion of Bitcoin in it, and it's free to store for eternity. You don't have to ever spend anything to get it to continue to be able to work. Same thing with people that are on the lower end of the spectrum. You don't have to have minimum balances. There are no annual fees. So it's very accessible that way as a way to start saving. Go try to start investing in real estate. If you're on the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, it's virtually impossible. Bitcoin is a better tool for savings, better tool for building wealth than real estate. And it's accessible to virtually anybody. You can buy $1 of Bitcoin if you wanted to. So truly inclusive and accessible, powerful savings technology, wealth generation technology. And so even if it's already at 100,000 now, it's going to go to 10, it's going to go to a million, it's going to go to 10 million, who knows when, but it'll grow much faster than a lot of the other things that you're thinking about investing into. That's what I would tell retail folks. That's the big part of it. And also, even if there is some, occasional lotto ticket that takes off when it comes to these altcoins, the chances of you guessing the right one is so low. It's literally like going to play the Russian roulette, or it's like going to play roulette at the casino. You're obviously not Russian roulette with the gun. The regular type of roulette at the casino, where your odds of winning are extremely low. It's stacked against you. The house is betting against you. That's not true with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, the house doesn't exist. There is no house because it was built in a truly inclusive and grassroots way. The bottom up technology of the governance structure that exists within Bitcoin ensures that there's no CEO, no executive, no VC, no hedge fund that is profiteering off the space or is extracting value from you. So you can continue to operate within the Bitcoin ecosystem, knowing that when you buy one Bitcoin or you buy 1/10 of one Bitcoin, that you're going to have that fraction of the total supply of Bitcoin for now until, for many, many years from now. I'm one of the believers in the space that believes that the hard supply cap of 21 million will never change. And so you can buy your piece of that Bitcoin network and have it for likely the rest of your life, if not for generations to come.
Well said, and it sounds like quite the innovation, this Bitcoin thing. But sticking to 10 years out, we'll hit you with some rapid fire here. How many state reserves do we have?
Well, we've got likely 3 already this year. So the odds of it going to 6 next year, I think, are pretty baked in at this point. Um, and then from there, I imagine over the next several years, we'll probably get to at least a dozen. I'd have to say in 10 years. I mean, in a decade, you could theoretically at least have at least three-quarters of the United States having passed this type of policy into law.
So it's 2035. What's the price of one Bitcoin?
2035. Wow. Oh, I hate doing price predictions because like everyone's always wrong, including myself. But I don't see how we're not at $500,000 or at least $350,000 by 2035. But that's like forever away. It's like eternity.
Yeah, that's one of the more conservative estimates I've heard.
Is it now? Oh gosh, I'm not even bullish anymore. Look at that. It's
Yeah, people
wild.
this year are calling for like 250,000 just for this year alone. So, okay,
Yeah, I mean, so five. I'll stick with 500,000. You're right. Yeah, because I'd say 250,000 is possible within the next few years. It's just hard to imagine. Like, here's the problem: is I don't know where we are on the supply curve, and so the reason why you're seeing diminished returns per cycle or per year, or Bitcoin is shrinking in the amount it grows each year in price, is because we are in like the flat half of the supply curve and availability of Bitcoin. The way to put this into context for retail investors is the reason why in the early days you saw these crazy price swings, like mad price swings where it would jump 1,000% or whatever, is because there was not very much available supply for the amount of demand that there was. There wasn't just like that. It was hard to get Bitcoin. There wasn't that many exchanges. There wasn't many places you could buy it safely. There just wasn't that many minted. And so you would see these huge price swings. Well, now, right now, we are coming off of, it's been just recent, it hasn't been very long, but we are coming off of one of the most liquid in the sense of available supply. We are coming off of one of the most liquid times like in human history. Like, just you could just easily buy a lot of Bitcoin right now and not move the market. Like, that is a known thing. Saylor is buying millions of dollars of Bitcoin all the time. There are big actors coming into this space buying tons of Bitcoin. And so it's just my personal belief. It's because we have so much Bitcoin available, this very liquid markets, tons of Bitcoin on exchanges. But that has actually started to shift for the first time in Bitcoin's history. I think it's been over the last year or so. I don't quote me on it. I'm not a macro trader. But the available supply of Bitcoin on exchanges, OTC desks, has been coming down and has not gone back up as the price has gone up. Typically, when the price goes up a lot, we see more Bitcoin come onto exchanges because people are like, well, this is my price that I will sell at. I'm actually happy with this price. Me and you might not be happy to sell at 100,000, but someone who held since $10 might be perfectly happy to sell it to 100,000 and just sort of cash in. Or maybe they're only cashing in part of what and they're still holding on to some, right? But I think we're going to end up in a world soon where we get on the other side of that supply curve. It's almost like an S. It's like this, and then it goes like this, where you don't have any available supply of Bitcoin, where it's hard to get Bitcoin. And that's where we'll see, I think, the true monetization of Bitcoin, where the price of Bitcoin will explode and it'll look a lot like it did in the early days. You'll see these huge fluctuations. Now, this is, of course, theory that is based off of a paper that we did at Satoshi Action. So this is sort of where I generate some of this, my thought process around this from. Dr. Murray Rudd on our team, the true expert on this. He's the one who really did the legwork on the paper, almost all the work on the paper. And it was really interesting, though, to be along for the process because I was like, dude, I think is this going to happen again? And we kind of came to the conclusion that we think once we get on the other side of the supply curve, which means once we get to a place where there just really isn't that much Bitcoin left to buy, the amount of money it will take to move the market will shrink. Because to move the market now, you'd have to make, let's say, $1 billion purchase. In a decade to move the market, that same movement might only require a $50 million purchase. So I would tell people that even though you don't see these crazy gains like you did in the past, not only is it likely that it possibly returns, but even if it doesn't, Bitcoin still is growing at an incredible rate and is still growing and is a better, more durable asset that you can save into and get in and out of super easily, more than real estate, more than a lot of other stocks and bonds. And so certainly I would encourage people to jump into the space. We always say get off zero, just get a little bit of Bitcoin. And I think that is also really helpful for the education process. Once you have a little bit of Bitcoin, you start to learn a lot more about it.
Yeah, as you mentioned, institutions like MicroStrategy are basically gobbling up Bitcoin
Yeah,
now, and they aren't spitting, or they don't have plans to spit this back up, or spit it back out. So I think what you were talking about with that S curve kind of, taking a different shape there makes sense. Just
that's right, Charles. It's going to happen.
Yeah, just two more here on the 10 years out rapid fire. How much Bitcoin in terms of dollar terms do you think states will own at that point?
I hard to say. Also, apologies. It was we're on rapid fire. The last question certainly wasn't rapid fire, so I'll make these last two quick. I have no idea. No one knows. Impossible to predict.
Okay. Is the U.S. actively purchasing Bitcoin on a regular schedule at that time at the federal level?
What in which year? 10 years?
Yeah.
I'd like to believe so. I'd like to hope so.
I love how you took some time to think there. We're definitely going to come back and check in on this 10 years from now, Dennis. But thank you so much for participating. As you mentioned, no one knows, but I think like you talked very thoughtfully about throughout the podcast, what makes Bitcoin a powerful tool and an incredible innovation.
Mm.
Those ideas are really structurally sound. So I think those are the key things for folks to look at and to consider as they, think about what they want to do long term. But thank you so much for being here with us today. How can the Bitcoin community support your efforts going forward?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on, Charles. It's good conversation, and certainly people can support our work. We're 100% funded by donors. So all the great things that we do, from passing strategic Bitcoin reserve policy to passing digital rights or Bitcoin rights into law, all comes from the support of our active donor network. And we're very honored and fortunate to have such an incredible network of folks that support everything that we do. But we want to be able to do more work, and we want to be able to get more wins for Bitcoin and to ensure that the United States is the dominant leader for decades to come. I don't think we have totally locked that in yet. I think there is still a chance to lose that leadership. And so we need to be using the time we have right now, the momentum we have, the wins on our backs to continue moving forward to get those wins. But we can't do it without the support of our donors. So people can go to satoshiaction.io and they can become monthly donors with fiat. They can send sats. Both of those options are there. And we really appreciate anybody who's considering it.
All right. Wonderful, Dennis. Thanks again for joining us.